Yeah, welcome to the workshop. I'm Stefan Huebner, and I think we all know that there's some irony in doing a workshop on digital humanities in a fully digital way. Also see this just as a chance to further explore new forms of academic exchanges. So this event is organized by Anthony Medrano from Yale-Nus College and by myself, Stefan Huebner from ARI, and is also hosted by ARI, the Asia Research Institute of NUS, with the support of Yale-Nus College. And in that sense, I would like to thank Tim Bunnell, the director of ARI, for his encouragement and also support. And Tim will now give a couple of welcome remarks, which will be followed by some introductory remarks given by Anthony and myself.
Thanks, everyone, for joining this event from all around the world. As Stefan said, my name's Tim Bunnell. I'm currently director of the Asia Research Institute, or ARI, which is the main organizing institution for this event. It's a real pity I'm not able to welcome you to ARI's home in the AS8 building on the NUS Kent Ridge campus. That building is pretty much empty right now for obvious reasons. But as Stefan just said, if there's any ARI event that is appropriately fully digital or fully digitally mediated, it's one on this topic of digitizing and visualizing sources on Asia. Now, although we're not at ARI physically, I can't resist telling you just a little bit about ARI, what a great place, a real place it usually is and will be again. ARI is a university-level research institute that focuses on Asia and does so mainly through the humanities and social sciences. We organize lots of exciting events like this one. We host international visiting scholars. We have our own full-time as well as jointly appointed researchers, and we support ambitious collaborative research projects, bringing together scholars from across disciplines and also faculty boundaries. ARI is divided into 7 research clusters. Don't worry, Stefan, Anthony, I'm not going to reel them off, but you can, if you're interested, have a look at what they are from our website. I encourage you to do so. Digital humanities is not currently one of those clusters, but there's a growing amount of digital humanities work being done across several of ARI's clusters. And events like the one today build momentum towards the possibility of a dedicated digital humanities research cluster at ARI in the future. Now, I'm sure pretty much all of you are aware that Stefan and Anthony's interest in digital humanities centers around their work on biodiversity and the phenomenon of invasive species. That was the theme of the previous very successful event that they co-organized back in February, which seems like another world now, doesn't it? That was entitled When Species Travel. For me, the nexus of digital humanities and environment is one that I'm particularly interested in and to see how it develops. But I also notice a variety of other equally important avenues for the development of digital humanities that will be covered in your discussions today, some of which I'll be able to tune into, and I'm very much looking forward to them. Now, I've talked a lot about ARI. I must acknowledge that credit for this event extends beyond ARI. It's been organized with support from Yale-Nus College, where Anthony, of course, is also based, and with seed funding from the ODPRT, the Office of the Deputy President for Research and Technology at NUS, one of their humanities and social sciences seed fund grants. And I'm really pleased to see that the lineup includes HSS scholars, humanities and social sciences scholars, from across campus, from elsewhere in Singapore and internationally. And I even note that there are some contributions from folks, from experts who might not conventionally identify with humanities and social sciences. So welcome to all of you. Well done, Stefan and Anthony, for bringing this event to fruition, especially in the ongoing context of COVID-19 and all the associated restrictions. And just also on organizational matters, as ever, thanks to ARI's wonderful events team. They are virtually as wonderful as they are in in physical presence. In particular, on this occasion, I think to Sharon Ong, but also to Val and to Minghua, many thanks. So yeah, welcome again, everyone. I hope the exchanges and discussion go well. And finally, As with all ARI events, my hope is that the workshop today proves to be a catalyst for further conversations and collaborations in the future. So thank you very much, and enjoy the day.
Thanks very much, Tim. So I'm going to just, I think, build on Tim's points. Again, echo the thank yous that he made and the same that Stefan made. I'd like to, again, reiterate thank you to the participants and the presenters for tuning in, zooming in, and spending your time with us. What I'd like to do is just do a quick recap in terms of what we hope to achieve through the workshop. And it's just essentially 4 kind of simple points. One, it's to learn about what works in the digital humanities. So that's kind of a simple, I think, goal that we have, is to learn from different experiences, different kinds of grant projects, different kinds of institutional settings, what's working for you in terms of the digital humanities. And then second, to learn about those projects more deeply and more intimately. So that's the second one. Third, I think it's really to foster a community of collaboration and exchange. Now that we are in the situation that we're in, physical travel isn't as possible as it once was. So it's real timely to sort of, I think, build a community that's anchored in methodological similarities or thematic interests, and things of that sort. And then finally, I think what we hope to achieve through all this, so in addition to the community, it's to think about pedagogy and scholarship and cultural work in new ways. We've got folks coming from libraries, we've got faculty who teach, we've got students, we've got folks from the National Archives and other kinds of institutions where, you know, I think there's a real great frontier for synergy here. And that's essentially what we hope to foster and cultivate through today's epic marathon experience from 9 in the morning till 8:30 at night. I mean, we're doing it. So thank goodness for Zoom. But that's all that I've got. And over to you now, Stefan.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tim and Anthony. Yeah, I would like to quickly introduce the speakers. And I will keep this very short for one reason, that you can actually look up the longer bio text in the program that you all probably have ready. And the other reason is also that theoretically we might have some brief technical hiccups. So I want to give really as much time as possible to the presenters. So our first 2 presenters are Cathy, Derose and Peter Leonard from Yale University. And Peter is the director of the Yale University's Digital Humanities Lab, and Cathy is program manager for the DH Lab, who last summer also taught here in Singapore at Yale-Nus, if I remember correctly. And I would like to emphasize also how grateful we are that you 2 managed to join us despite the time difference of 12 hours to the US East Coast in combination with the virus situation. And I also would like to briefly mention that one of the collaborators that the 2 are involved with is Jane Jacobs and her team of digital maps scholars at Yale-Nus, and we will hear from them a bit later in the second presentation. But now, Peter and Cathy, thanks again, and the show is yours.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Stefan, and to all the organizers, Anthony, and all the others who've made this possible in Singapore. I am going to take about 3 minutes to take us through an initial conversation about the Digital Humanities Lab at Yale University Library. And then my colleague Cathy is going to talk about a really special part of the program around training and education for scholars, including graduate students, undergraduates, and faculty. And then I'll close off this presentation with about 7 minutes at the end on some of our more recent efforts in the Digital Humanities Lab around the intersection between machine vision and the historical archive. So with that, I'm actually going to share my screen so everybody can see my slides. And then I'm going to turn my slides on full screen. And what I want to make sure is that everybody can see, and I'll wait till this comes through. Anybody who's on my screen, if you just give a thumbs up, great. Okay, so our talk today is called From Archive to Insight, Digital Humanities Lab as Scholarly Accelerator. And I think it's really important that we not take this conversation as only about the Digital Humanities Lab at Yale, which is one of dozens, if not more, in the continental United States and indeed across the world. So when you see the notion of a Digital Humanities Lab as a scholarly accelerator, I really want us to think about it as something which goes beyond our experience in New Haven and speaks to the ways that people are considering new forms of digital scholarship, indeed across the globe. However, we are a part of a library. We're a part of the Yale University Library, and you're seeing the lobby of Sterling Memorial Library here, which is the building that we're in. Like everything that looks old in America, it's a 20th century building. It's the finest craftsmanship of 1932, designed to look like something much older. There are about 500 people who work in Yale University Library. It's quite large. We have about 15 million books, and we have many buildings across campus. And the particular building I'm going to be talking to you about today is the Sterling Memorial Library from the 30s. And we're actually going to be looking at the bottom left of the floor plan here. So at the bottom left, you'll see there's a darker part of the floor plan. And that's where the Digital Humanities is within Sterling Library. Sterling is actually a very large building, so we do have a lot of space. That's good news. The bad news is that the space looks like this. So this is a room from 1931 when the building was opened. It's the original reserve book reading room. It was used as a reserve book reading room until the 1970s. And so what we had to do is we had to figure out a way to take a room this historic and this historicizing and figure out a way to repurpose it for a digital humanities lab, a space that could be used to accelerate scholarship in the 21st century. And so this is what we came up with. I'll show you some pictures in just a second, but this is a sort of schematic overview of the space. You can see that we kept a lot of the original features of the room, including the leaded glass windows and the bookcases and the wooden walls, but that we put special things in the middle of the room to kind of bring it up to date and to do things like integrating print collections, which you're seeing some books on the shelves of the wall here, but you're seeing that interspersed with some really high resolution video displays. You're seeing one of our graduate students presenting his work on one of these big displays. And then behind that, to the right on the screen, you're seeing some of our team working inside a kind of glass area, which holds our deep learning, our sort of artificial intelligence analysis equipment, all taking place inside this historic room from the 1930s. And so it's been a real project to build out a space within a historic fabric that supports modern scholarship in Yale University Library. We're very proud of this space, and once things reopen, we certainly hope that some folks on the call today might one day come over to New Haven and take a tour of it. But I think what was more exciting than the room itself is really what the activities that go on inside the room. And so with the notion of transitioning over to Cathy, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let her take control to give the next part of the presentation.
Great, thank you, Peter. So I'm going to start sharing my screen in a second, and I'm also going to drop into the chat window a link to my slides in case anything goes awry with my PowerPoint or you just want to have a backup copy. You can see it there. So let's see. All right, is everyone able to see this screen okay? Perfect. So as Peter said, Peter talked for a few minutes about the Digital Humanities Lab as a space. I'm going to transition us now into thinking about it as a service. And in particular, as Peter said, I'm going to look at some of the opportunities that we offer for training for humanities researchers who come to the lab, though we also see a number of social scientists and work with them as well. One of the things we first had to set out to do was identify the areas of DH that were best equipped to support, both in terms of the expertise that we have in the lab, as well as in the collections that we have access to, and the kinds of projects that researchers on campus are really interested in pursuing. And so we have these 4 general buckets that we've come up with. So we have text analysis, where maybe you have a large periodical collection and you're interested in seeing shifts in discourse. If you're a Yale student or faculty member, that's something we want to help you pursue. We have visual analysis. Peter will show an example in a little bit about a machine vision project we have underway that's using machine vision techniques to think about large-scale visual collections. And then we have spatial analysis. So we have a lot of interest in mapping projects on campus, especially in this area of creating interactive maps that are shareable online and that are using historical materials. So very much aligned with a lot of the topics of today's workshop. And then network analysis. So maybe you want to see how relationships between entities change over time. The network analysis methods might be a good approach for you. And so once we have these 4 buckets in place, then we could really think about how best to introduce them to researchers on campus and how best to support people in their efforts to take on projects when they might not have a background in any of these particular methods, and they're not programmers or statisticians, and they're not interested in becoming programmers or statisticians. And so we've developed a number of different training opportunities. And here's the list of them. It probably looks like a very familiar list, where we have consultations. We have a drop-in office hours 4 days a week when people can come by the lab and ask for help with a project, either getting it started or help debugging some code that they've maybe already written. They can work with DH Lab staff as well as graduate student consultants who we employ. What we find really helpful about consultations is that they give us an indication of where we need to be ramping up training at any given moment on campus. So if we have a lot of people stopping by with network analysis questions, that's usually a good sign that we should be offering a network analysis workshop. So that way we can train multiple people at once and develop a community of people who are learning these methods together rather than holding a number of one-on-one isolated consultations. So consultations feed into the workshops that we offer, which we have standalone workshops, but we're also thinking a lot about developing a series of workshops that will take a more guided approach to learning DH. And so our most popular one right now is the Introduction to Digital Humanities series that we have. It's a week-long series. It's the one that I had the pleasure of teaching at Yale-Nus last year. And what this series is it's really a concentrated deep dive into digital humanities, where we look at what is humanities data, and then we discuss several different ways of analyzing it, visualizing it, and sharing it, using those 4 buckets that I talked about before: text analysis, visual analysis, mapping, and networks. But we know that those 4 buckets are just a slice of what DH is. So we also wanted to offer training scholarships for students and librarians to be able to attend the summer institutes that happen in normal conditions. So that way they can take digital humanities workshops in areas that we're maybe not specialists in. So they want to take a virtual reality or a 3D printing workshop, and then they'll come back to campus and show what they've learned. The last type of support we have is project support, which is in our rapid prototyping grants. These are nominally 1 to 3 week engagements between lab staff and researchers who are interested in getting a project off the ground. Even though it's very project focused, we also think of it as a training opportunity because they're really learning how to put a project together from the ground up. So they might be working with our user experience designer to think about how do you put together a mock-up or a wireframe, or they're working with our developers to see how they construct and scaffold code for a large-scale project. But for all of these opportunities, what we see is that while they're very helpful, they're limiting because we can only offer a number of them each semester. We can only take on so many projects. We can only teach so many workshops. And so the other kind of training that we developed is one that was geared more towards capacity building, where we're adopting a teach the teacher model, where we can teach somebody about DH and then they can go on and teach others about it. And so the flagship program we have for that is our Digital Humanities Teaching Fellowship program, which is for graduate students who have some kind of teaching appointment on campus, whether that be as a teaching assistant for a faculty member or if they're the instructor of record of their own course. So this is something that was established in 2015 with a 2-fold goal of integrating digital humanities methods into Yale College classes, so that even if a faculty member was teaching a class and they were interested in DH, but they weren't practitioners of it, and so they weren't sure how to integrate it, they could work with one of our digital humanities teaching fellows to figure out the best approach and tools that they might use in the class. And then the other goal was to provide more semester-long sustained support to our graduate students who are interested in learning these methods. So it wouldn't just be a one-off workshop that they took with us, but it would rather be a semester-long time that we would be working alongside one another, thinking about the kinds of digital humanities that they were interested in and how it applied to their specific discipline, and then to the classes that they were teaching. So they're learning methods and they're learning how to teach those methods. So far, we've awarded 30 of them from over 15 different departments. You can see the list of them there. The ones in bold, African American Studies, and English, represent the departments we've seen the most applicants coming from, followed very closely by art history. But you can see it's a pretty extensive list, which has been one of the exciting things about the program. The other capacity building program that we have is our Digital Humanities Summer Internship, and this is actually a partnership with Yale-Nus that was established in 2018, where a Yale-Nus student comes to New Haven, works with the Digital Humanities Lab in an area of DH that interests them, and then they divide their time applying what they're learning, half towards a Yale-Nus faculty-led project and half towards a DH lab project that we have underway. We've awarded 2 of them to date. We were very close to awarding a 3rd when a global pandemic happened, and so we've postponed that at the moment. But you can see the 2 maps that are showing here emerged from those student projects. Both of the projects happen to be really geospatially focused. And we had students both starting from software that they found online and then starting to code up their own projects toward the end. And so I thought what would be helpful, given the topic of today's workshop, would be to close my remarks by looking at some of the software that we looked at with these students and that we often recommend for people who are interested in getting a geospatial project off the ground. And so we usually recommend off-the-shelf software for just starting out. We find it really helpful because before you invest all your time transforming your data for a network analysis project, you want to be sure that you have a network analysis project. And so we recommend starting with sample data that you find that looks kind of like yours, and using tools that are already out there before you fully commit to coding something from scratch yourself. And so some of the software that we recommend, if you're working with historical maps, which many of our humanities researchers are, we recommend using GeoReferencer, which is a free tool that will let you georeference historical maps, so overlaying historical maps on top of modern day base maps. And you can see an example of one here. What I like about GeoReferencers is you can see it's pretty user-friendly. It gives you the modern day map on one side and the historical map on the other. And so you're able to put down points and say where they line up, and then you'll get an image like this on the right where eventually it will overlay them for you. The nice thing about GeoReferencer is it's been developed by Quak Technologies. They've been doing a lot of work in the IIIF space. I know some of the papers later will be talking about IIIF. So the maps that you get out of this are IIIF compliant. But the other nice thing about GeoReferencer is it gives you a link that you can use, a map tiling link that you can use and import into other mapping software really easily. It is freemium software in the sense of they give you one map for free. After that, they like to charge you. So Yale is right now exploring what an enterprise license would look like with them. But in general, in the DH Lab, we strongly recommend using free or open source software so that way students and researchers don't become dependent on software that then when they graduate or leave your university, they can no longer access. So this is for georeferencing the maps. Once you have your georeference map and you want to plug it into something, we often point our researchers towards ArcGIS Online, which is run by Esri, which is one of the industry leading standards for mapping. They too are freemium software in that they charge for their full desktop version, but their online version is free up to a certain number of data points. But one of the beautiful things about ArcGIS Online is once you have your spreadsheet like you have on the left, all you need to do is drag and drop it over a map and it will put all the points on the map instantly for you as long as you have a longitude and latitude column. And so it makes mapping really user-friendly and accessible. And then the last mapping tool that I'll mention is, I should also say ArcGIS also has georeferencing capabilities built into it as well. So maybe you couldn't find your historical map, or maybe your map is of a period that's already has a lot of georeference maps available for it. ArcGIS Online comes with a number of georeference maps, so you can easily import their own map layers as well. But then the last mapping tool that I want to mention is another Esri product, ArcGIS Story Maps. And so this is a platform that lets you combine any visual, textual, audio information that you might have. And again, it's a really user-friendly one because they've created all these really nice templates for you. The hard part is coming up with the content. Once you have it, you can paste it in and start to structure your story. And I've included a link to one of my favorite ones that's thinking about ecology and given the focus of today's workshop. I know one of the papers is going to be looking at Night Lab's story maps, which is also a terrific tool. The only reason we have been using ArcGIS's version of it is just because it does sync with ArcGIS Online, so that you could take your ArcGIS Online map and plug it into story maps really easily. But so these are the tools that we often recommend starting with, because again, they're user-friendly, they're free, it's a low barrier of entry. But once researchers start using them, if they encounter limitations, that's when we encourage them to come back to us and say, okay, I know what piece is missing in order for my project to really be successful. Now I need to think about how we can custom develop something. And so that's when we start thinking about the rapid prototyping grant, for which we have a number of different templates in place to structure those engagements, where we have a lean canvas form that really focuses on what are the core research goals of this project that we want to achieve. We have a user analysis form that centers the user. So how can we design an application that is user-friendly? And then we have a project charter, is a document that all team members sign just to make sure that everybody's on the same page with what we're committing to. All of those documents are available on our website in case they can be helpful. But now that we are in the custom coding place, I will turn things back over to Peter so that he can talk about collection scale analysis.
Great, well, thanks so much, and I'll switch over back to my slides to take us to the end of the presentation. So I just want to make sure that everybody can see that okay. Great. So we've talked a little bit about the room that the Digital Humanities Lab is a part of and inside a research library. Cathy's talked about the training and the support options we offer for folks who want to do some of their own work. We thought we'd just end by talking about some of our current projects that circulate around enormous digitized archives of historical material. Many institutions all over the world, national libraries in Europe and in Asia, have been digitizing material for decades. But it's really only the last 10 or 15 years that we're at the hundreds of thousands or millions of objects that we can find in our national museums and some of our large research libraries. And so one of the things that the Digital Humanities Lab has been trying to do as a service for the Yale community and for a larger group of scholars online across the world is to contribute around an ongoing discussion around collection scale analysis. What are the affordances, what are the tools that you might need in order to sort of consider an archive of 3,000 images, 6,000 images, maybe even 60,000 images, 80,000 images, whether those are manuscript documents, historical photos, it could be maps, it could be all sorts of things that are available online through both scholarly and nonprofit organizations. And so what I wanted to do today with these slides was think a little bit about a particular museum that we have at Yale. Some of you might have heard of the Yale Center for British Art. If you ever visited New Haven, it's one of our numerous art museums. And what we're doing with this visualization of the Yale Center for British Art is quite simply visualizing all of the Yale Center for British Art. This is about 31,000 artworks on my screen at the same time in a sort of a constellation, an archipelago. It might look like if I had gone into the art museum and take every single piece of art off the wall and thrown it on the ground, you might be looking at something like that. Of course, if I truly had taken all of the art off of the wall at the Yale Center for British Art and thrown it on the ground, it really wouldn't have landed in such a way that all of the caricatures of dandies would be in the same space on the floor, or that, for example, all of the images that have to do with animals have landed in the same area. So if you look at the artwork on my screen now, you might see horses or dogs or camels. But in fact, in this visualization, that's exactly what's happened. All of the artwork that is visually similar to each other has in fact landed around each other, and it isn't by accident. It's because we've used principles of machine vision to sort of find inherent order inside the images themselves. And this has all sorts of interesting things you can think about. There are all these sorts of interesting genres in British art. So here are all our political cartoons here on the screen. There are other areas that you can zoom into, but what I want to show you for this is kind of an accidental cluster. I don't really know if this cluster was something we knew we were going to find when we started this project. If I zoom in these 31,000 images here, what you're going to see is you're going to see botanical illustration. You're going to see drawings of plants. And I actually don't know if the Yale Center for British Art has an explicit category of botanical illustration. But what I do know is that the visual characteristics of plant drawings are significant enough to help them self-organized when thrown on the floor in a kind of massive visualization of all the artwork. We talk a little bit on the website about how we do this work. It involves convolutional neural networks and machine vision that seek out similarities in a very high dimensional space. But what I wanted to do was take us away from the Yale Center for British Art and consider a different historical archive. This one is an archive of the Danish West Indies, and if you're not familiar with the Danish West Indies, the best way to think about them is that they are the current United States Virgin Islands. So if we jump to this tropical location, we have about 6,700 historical images from this colonial experience, what were essentially slave plantations. What you can see is that there's all similarly clusterings of images that are visually similar to each other in this historic archive. So if I go over here in the middle of my screen, what I'll see is all of these images, which are kind of like 4 images put together. I'll leave that on the screen just a little longer. So this is clearly somebody's album that was digitized page by page. And they're visually similar to each other, and that's why they're close to each other. I have another cluster here, which is basically the ruins of windmills. And so anywhere I click here, I'm going to get some kind of ruin of a windmill of some kind. And this is because all of these things are visually similar to one another. But that's not what I really wanted to focus on in this historical archive. What I wanted to, again, focus on was the discovery of these, what we're calling sort of botanical illustrations here. So I'll just move this cluster a little bit apart. And what you'll see is here I can click on these things and see these hand drawings, these hand-drawn and painted illustrations of some of the sort of biodiversity of the Danish West Indies. If I have questions about this, or if I want to go further, of course, I can always go from an individual picture to the museum or the archive that digitized that. And so we can actually go in here and see the image up close and inspect it in different ways, get that really beautiful full screen vision. But that's kind of some software that we're writing in the Digital Humanities Lab to consider the problem of tens or even hundreds of thousands of digitized historical artifacts, and in thinking about some of the problems inherent in trying to go through those one by one, the problems of trying to look at thousands and thousands of images and not really being able to see the forest for the trees. So we hope that with some of our open source software and with the power of machine vision, we can sort of allow the scholar to engage with the digitized cultural heritage archives in new ways and see sort of at a macroscopic perspective some of the possibilities of new forms of scholarly research. With that, I'll just say thank you on the behalf of the Digital Humanities Lab team. That's me and Cathy there in the middle, and then to my left on the screen is Monica Ong-Reed, our visual designer, and to Cathy's right is Doug Duhame, who's the software engineer who works with us here in the lab. And with that, I think we can just turn it over for questions.
So, yeah, we have now the Q&A, and yeah, as mentioned, if you want to ask a question, please either quickly mention this in chat or send a PM private message directly to Gemma. So I would like to ask Gemma, do we already have some people who would like to ask questions?
Yeah, it looks like Jane Jacobs has a question that's posted in the chat. So if you want to ask that.
Peter, thank you so much for the presentation, and Cathy as well. It was great. It's nice to see you both. It's so intriguing to see a collection reclustered, but I'm just wondering to what extent it, first of all, I guess my question is, I've only said part of what my question is. One is, to what extent does that map back into metadata, you know, the kind of catalog data that would already be there that you could, you know, what advance do we get over, you know, our old systems of categorizing and searching? Do you think it's seeing something new? And then to what extent can it work across collections, and how easy is that?
Yeah, it's a great question. That intersection between how computers see and how humans have traditionally described and categorized information, whether it's books or paintings, is really interesting. I have one demonstration I might try to show you guys, which is touches on that a little bit. It's the notion of the of the trans-institutional collection. Can everybody see my screen now? So what we're looking at here is about 30,000 pictures from different museums in the Norwegian capital of Oslo in Norway. So we're looking at about 31,000 images on the screen. That's a lot to look at. What we'll do is we'll orient them according to visual similarity so that we can have a better sense of what the organic patterns are. And initially we see the categories of the, in the 19th century in Northern Europe, priests would wear a certain kind of collar. And so everybody who's in this particular cluster is a priest, right? There is no category really of priest, but there's an implicit latent category of priest. We also have categories of skiing or having fun on the snow and ice, which is, I guess, something they don't do too much in Singapore, but it's a big hobby in Norway. And so we're looking at a kind of latent cluster of ski activities, snow activities. I know this big image looks like Australia, but it's not actually. What we want to do though is we want to put those visual clusters, these clusters of like buildings here, which appear on my screen, in conversation with the unique collection practices of maybe like the 6 or 7 big museums in Norway. And so one of the ways we can do that is we can actually turn on and off parts of the constellation. So as I choose different museums from the menu, what you'll see is the parts of the constellation change. And so maybe one example here is that there's a whole bunch of, well, one of the museums has a lot of images, but if I go to this particular cluster, you see how most of the images on the screen are darkened if I choose that. So I'll choose everything on, now I'll choose this, only that museum. Most of the screen except for this area gets dark, and that's because it's only these images that are in the center which are remaining lit, and that's because they're from a particular museum. Now, the Oslo Byarkiv happens to be the city museum of Oslo, and they collected all of these pictures of public transport, of trolley cars and trains, whereas the other museums, if I switch to other museums, you see that center goes dark. So it really is the Oslo Byarkiv that is focused on trolley categories. There's another example of a very distinctive visual collection down here I should just mention that a lot of people look at, and this is every image in this cluster was apparently taken in a kind of circular camera. And this was mysterious to us, and we were trying to figure out, is this just some weird lens or something like that? And as always, the answer turned out to be in the metadata. So if you go to the original museum, you can read quite clearly here that this was a guy who hid a camera in his jacket. So he had a hidden camera. It's like Google Glass. He was hiding a camera, and he was taking pictures of people without their knowledge in sort of early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century Oslo. And that's why everything is within a round frame, because he had this kind of hidden camera. So that relationship between the archival history, the unique sort of collection practices of individual museums. If you think about Yale's experience, a lot of our museums actually, it's all artwork collected by Paul Mellon, and so that particular, his connoisseurship had, for good or for ill, an enormous impact on what is actually preserved in New Haven. So I think that's a great question around, how can we, and it's certainly driving our software development, is to put the explicit categories, which maybe libraries or librarians or archivists or scholars have determined, in conversation with the organic patterns which emerge from sort of the arrangement of raster pixels in a digitized image, and to see where they line up and to see where they're kind of orthogonal to each other.
Gemma, do we have more questions or?
Anthony has a question as well.
Okay, then go ahead, Anthony.
Mine's very short, but first, thank you so much, Peter and Cathy. That was just beautiful and wonderful and just absolutely informational. I mean, it's fantastic. And what a great way to sort of start off the day, too. It was really, really beautiful. My question is really quite simple. It has to do with your collection scale analysis. I just wanted to know, what program are you using to do that? I didn't catch the name of the program.
Yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, a lot of people, not just us, are thinking about this question of machine vision. It's kind of a standard thing that people are working on. We read about this in the newspaper about Facebook analyzing all your pictures. If you carry an Android phone or if you carry an iPhone in your pocket, then you have a system which is capable of, for example, finding all the cats you've ever taken a picture of I just searched for the word cat, and I have apparently 307 pictures of cats. I've never labeled those pictures, so a robot has done that without my knowledge or consent. So this is happening in the commercial domain. It's happening on Facebook to sell you ads. It's happening on your phone to help you find images of coffee or bagels or something like that, chili crab. The question is, how can scholars kind of take the same developments that are happening in Google and Facebook and Microsoft and turn them into scholarly tools for working with cultural heritage material, natural science material? So we write our own software called Pixplot, P-I-X-P-L-O-T, Pixplot, which is built on some of the same systems that Google or Microsoft or Facebook use too. Nobody has an absolute sort of copyright or patent on some of the general techniques. And what we're interested in doing is less the kind of labels of cat or something, which is for a sort of an anachronistic way to think about colonial Denmark, and instead trying to just extract general patterns from the same the sort of high dimensional space, which is eventually producing a captioning network. So if you Google for Pixplot, P-I-X-P-L-O-T, you'll find software that we wrote. It's not really something we invented. We're just putting other parts, we're putting the same parts together that Google is doing to help you find images. And we're doing it kind of in a different way, hopefully one that's more focused on libraries, archives, museums, and universities.
And on your website or wherever you posted the software, do you have is there a manual in terms of how, like a how-to manual or a sort of step-by-step way to do this?
We do. We have, we taught a workshop on doing it at Stanford as part of the Fantastic Futures, the kind of library conference that happened in December. And for that workshop, we actually, fundamentally, what you see at the end of it is a web browser. So you see a website, and that's how you experience it. The way you build that visualization, the way you tweak the levers, or the way you change the assumptions of the model is through command line Python. So you're not actually programming in Python, but you are invoking a Python script which analyzes your pictures. And so people who are comfortable running Python scripts from the command line of their laptop can use it that way. And for people who aren't comfortable with that, we actually have a kind of Google Colab notebook, which is very similar to a Jupyter notebook, a way of kind of having a more graphical experience. Long term, one of our goals for Pixplot is to take even that part of the software complexity away and allow folks to, for example, just drag a folder of 1,000 images into a web browser and have some of that computation happen in their own computer. We aren't there yet, but that's an important direction for us, especially regarding smaller collections. So what we were seeing today was 31,000 images. Not everybody has 31,000 images. And so some people just have like 2,000 or something. What we do find is that you should think carefully about the scale of your work. And so if you have 6 images that you care a lot about, we definitely recommend that kind of close looking, close reading approach. It's really only when you get to a couple thousand that finding the organic, sort of the latent similarities in the corpus becomes tractable from a machine vision perspective. So it's kind of like that distinction between close reading and text mining. You got to think about what tool is going to give you the right results.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I mean, it's so it's wonderful to hear and wonderful to see, and right away what came to mind was the work that the Natural History Museum here is doing. I mean, 200 years of naturalist collecting, and dealing with collections that are all over the world, all related to Singapore. So there you quickly scale up to a number that is far beyond, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000.
That's right.
And in both images, specimen images, manuscripts, documents, I mean, the whole nine. I think that would be a great way to visualize the work that they're doing and the work that we're sort of working with them on doing as well. And I think Darren, the deputy director of the museum, is online as well. But that was fantastic. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. And it is true that we think natural science collections are also something that can be analyzed this way. You saw it accidentally being done in art museums, but I think we have colleagues at the Smithsonian and the Natural History Museum in Washington that have. What's very interesting about sort of taxonomy and organization is natural scientists are very practical. So they can say, well, here's the deal. We have like Linnaean taxonomy. We have binomial, classifications. We can just easily say this machine vision system is 99.6% accurate at classifying this fern versus that fern. And so folks are definitely doing that, and they're getting above human accuracy. They're sort of at the point where to get any more further deep into the subspecies, you need DNA sequencing compared with what the computer vision system can do. What we find in history and humanities is that oftentimes humanists are less comfortable with the notion of these kind of classifications. And so folks are more interested in the kind of suggestive sort of configurations, the archipelago, the kind of constellations that suggest many forms of contingent spatiality. You might have seen me reorient the thing from a grid to a constellation. And in fact, in certain versions of the tool, you can sort of orient the constellation according to different assumptions, because we know that all of these spatializations are incredibly, they're literally reductive. They're going from a 2048 dimensional space into a 2-dimensional space. So we're doing great violence to the subtlety of the interconnections between the visual objects. But on the other hand, I don't have a 2048 dimensional screen, so that's what we have to do.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot. We have 2 minutes left, so I think this will be the last question. Gemma, who is next on the...
Yeah, we have a question from Naoko Shimazu.
Thank you very, very much for this. And what I wanted to ask you was about the question of copyright to do with these images, because here we are using images as almost like numerical data or some kind of data. And yet when we do analysis of images, and if you want to incorporate them into academic work or books or whatever, there is an enormous amount of fee often that we have to pay for the usage. So how does DH deal with the kind of copyright issues of these images that one could use as data?
It's a great question. Cathy, do you want to tackle that one first?
Well, I can say that for the experiments that we're doing, we're using collections that are out of copyright or that are already publicly available. But yeah, what's something that we're watching what Google does and what lawsuits Google successfully encounters in terms of what size image we can reproduce. So we're working with a collection right now internal to the library that is under copyright restrictions. It's a visual resource collection. It's a teaching collection on campus, so it's old slides that people used to use in art history that have since been digitized. And it's a massive collection. There are a few 100,000 of them. And so we're thinking about visualizing them in Pixplot, but right now we're having to put them behind an authentication screen because it's not something we can make publicly available because it is a licensed collection. And so we're trying to figure out, is there a certain ratio at which we could share these images still? If they're small enough thumbnails, is that something we can still make available at this very large scale, even if we can't make the individual images themselves something that researchers could download because of copyright restrictions? So at least for the moment right now is building in that authentication layer so that you could have, if you had a collection that needed to be password protected for a class or for your research project, that you could still use Pixplot yourself, and then figuring out how you can distribute it publicly. That would be, I would consult an attorney for that one.
Yeah, am I right to thinking that this is still an ongoing issue, this the legal aspect of using these, particularly the kind of image visual data in, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it mainly raises, the problem arises when you need a high resolution print on the cover of your book or a plate in a journal article or something. Then one has to pay money. For low resolution things, I think folks have, there's more leeway.
Thanks a lot. So now we come to the second presentation in this panel, which will be given by Jane M. Jacobs and Chang Yueh. Jane is Professor of Urban Studies at Yale-Nus, and she's also the PI of the Yale-Nus Digital Historical Maps of Singapore and Southeast Asia project. That is the topic of the following presentation. And I should also briefly mention that she, Ronald, and the other members of her team were very helpful in advising us, that is me and Anthony, regarding our own project. And Yueh Xiang's interests are in public history and curating, and she's working with Jane as the senior curator of the Digital Historical Maps of Singapore and Southeast Asia project. Here again, we are very happy that you two were able to join us for this event, and the floor, or rather the screen, is now yours.
Great, thank you so much, Stefan and Anthony, for organizing this event. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, great. We're delighted to be a part of this conversation. We're very excited by it. And as always, thank you to Peter and Cathy for bringing the expertise of the Yale Centre into the conversation. I'm just going to go to my PowerPoint and share with you. Please indicate if it's, yeah, great. So we're through a funded project through the Ministry of Education, Social Science Thematic Research Grant. We have funding to look at the spatial history, if you like, of Southeast Asia as embodied in the source of historical cartographic assets. And so today, Chang, Yueh, Siang and I will just report on where we are with that project. So let me just get into that quite quickly. I'm just, great. So the Digital Historic Maps of Singapore and Southeast Asia project is really aiming to develop and populate and really to test bed. So we consider ourselves to be in an experimental space, an online platform of digital historic maps, all pre-1900, of Singapore and Southeast Asia. Now, we would like, our ambition is to learn how to produce a one-stop portal for viewing and sorting and interrogating maps, historic maps of pre-1900 maps of Southeast Asia. We have 4 collaborating libraries, and I'll go into those libraries in a minute. We, just as a way of trying to produce an editing device for us, because there's lots of these maps, we were particularly interested in routes and nodes. It's a very standard way in which historic maps have been thought about in terms of trying to analyse patterns of settlement and patterns of development. So that's our, most crude editing tool that we have. We have ambitions for high functionality and diverse functionality that would enable a whole range of users, and we have an imagination that sort of runs from the high school student in a history class or a geography class through to a retired enthusiast who, is sitting at home but is, captivated by historic maps and wants to kind of think and play with them in a different kind of way. And of course, alongside of that, we are trying to build the capacity of digital humanities in Singapore, in Yale-Nus College and in NUS more broadly. The team is me as a PI. I'm the PI because I'm a geographer by training. I used to teach history of geographical thought. This seemed to be sufficient justification for me to be the one who could write a narrative that was convincing enough to the funding agencies about historic maps and their public use and curation. My co-investigators are Ronald Milne, who's the Dean of Education, Resource and Technology at Yale-Nus, and a bundle of historians, Peter Borschberg, Tan Tai-yong, Derek Heng and Jessica Hanser, as a bundle of historians that are around us. We're reaching out to a wider group of historians of Southeast Asia, and China and Southeast Asia, India and Southeast Asia, but this is the core team. In addition, Chang Siang has come on as our senior curator, and Paul Tan is our IT director at Yale-Nus and is building the IT side of that. Michelle Quak, who you'll meet later, is advising on the GES side of things. And we're recruiting, we've just recruited our summer team of student researchers, some of who are in the audience today, and we're in the process of recruiting our IT team. And it's interesting the challenges that go on around that in particular contexts. And for this kind of work, when you haven't got a broader, thick capacity in this area. Our partner libraries are National Library Singapore, the Bodleian Libraries, the map collections of Leiden University Libraries, and the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. Are these the best libraries in the world for maps of Southeast Asia? Some yes, some no. They are friends of us, libraries that we have real meaningful conversations and relationships with, and who are willing to be on this experimental journey with us. Leiden University Libraries, of course, because of the Dutch East India Company, has got a vast and rich collection of maps of various kinds, and I won't go into any greater detail other than to say we're talking about thousands of maps through different kinds of collecting traditions that are now all within that collection. Compared to the National Library of Singapore, which has got a much more limited collection, but one with a very strong curatorial bent to it, that is providing maps for Singaporean public interested in the history of Singapore and the region. Key to the sharing is the IIIF, which is the International Image Interoperability Framework, which is basically allows interfacing between institutions for the sharing of images. We, I think, in the project are really only starting to fully grasp the capacity and limits of IIIF, and that's part of the preliminary phase work that we're doing now in the first, we've just gone through the first quarter of the project timeline, and understanding IIIF better is a big part of that. But essentially, it's supposed to facilitate and help transfer of digitized images and sharing. We have a picture that sort of conceptualizes what we imagine we're going to be doing. At the center is our platform. There's a user here. There's our various partner organizations that are here. And so we have a map for this. You go from a conceptual drawing like this into very fine-grained work quite quickly in this kind of project, and so that's a useful thing that we've learned, that the security that a diagram like this gives you is lost to some of the challenges and details that you enter. Very important part of the inspiration for the work was the work of Peter Borschberg, who's a Singapore-based historian, who has used cartographic sources very extensively. And Peter has a wonderful job as a historian, scouring various collections around the world for maps of Singapore and Southeast Asia, as he extends his understanding of the maritime and trade histories of primarily the Portuguese and the Dutch in the region. So he uses maps a lot. And so it's really useful, just as Peter said, it's really great to use, Peter and Cathy said it's really good to use off-the-shelf programs to start. It's also very useful to use a historian who's already sort of dealt in the knowledge formation that you're interested in. And so Peter uses maps in the making of his histories of Southeast Asia, and so he's a very important partner and resource. And one of the key first steps we will do is to put into the platform and to digitize his work in various ways, to sort of take his books and sort of rearrange them through visual, spatial, and digital cartographic mechanisms. So, for example, he has many maps that he's found that are absolutely captivating. This is one of them. So his Singapura and the Malay Peninsula, and you can imagine the kinds of rich storytelling and spatial histories that can come out of using this kind of asset. I want to just talk about two kinds of things we're thinking about at the moment. We're 7 months into the project and we're just about to go into the IT part of it. So we're very much thinking about what is it we're trying to do specifically with this large body of map information that we have access to. We're obviously engaged in the work of producing spatial histories. but we're using a very specific resource, and that is the historical cartographic map. And I think this is an awkward partnership or an awkward collaboration. Historic cartographic maps are not necessarily your best source for producing spatial histories. And the digital formats that we have for, and I'll sort of come back to that point, the digital formats we have for arranging and presenting historical information are very varied, and they're very useful for us. Digital formats, of course, do that key thing of challenging the dominance of a narrative framing of history. And they do that because they produce proximities, jumps, layers and composites, and Peter's exercise just now of making composites of images is a really key way of understanding the ways in which thinking through digital and spatial terms upsets and productively upsets, maybe awkwardly upsets, narrative history production. It allows us to distill, and anyone who's looked at the GIS history kind of interface knows that it allows us to see patterns in space across time, to understand spatial relationships in a moment in time, distributions and relationalities, the networks kind of stuff that was being discussed by Cathy. And it allows us to understand spatial and representational imaginations, if you like, the ideological content of images. And I just put a quote here from Richard White that was from the preface to Placing History, which is a really lovely source book. If anyone here hasn't touched that source book, it's very suggestive. And you can read it yourself, but this idea of how the spatial format of mapping history, digital spatial histories, can clog narratives, choke arteries, until, as he says, the reader is overwhelmed by details and can die for the tedium and confusion. And I think it's just useful for us to sort of dwell on this kind of warning or this skeptical note as we enter into this, because there is something very captivating about the scale thing that can happen, about the relational things that can happen, about the proximity things that can happen. But as I say, when I showed us a very neat conceptual drawing about how we're going to do this, you very quickly end up in a very detailed encounter with cultural assets, and knowing how to manage that is really important. So for us, we're sort of at this really key point in the project, which is thinking about these related questions, is what work can mapping and spatializing do for the histories that we're trying to make of Southeast Asia? What difference does it make to make a map of that history? But the other side that we're in is what narrative, visual, spatial work do we need to do to make historical map assets work for us, for our users, our intended users? These are not the same question in our mind. What the answer to the first one is about making a map of data that's historical data that's out there. The second one is about what do you do with the already spatialized cultural asset as a historical artifact. So we make a very big distinction now between different modalities of spatial history making. On the one hand, taking latent spatial information from historical sources and mapping that out using a GIS or some other sort of storytelling map system, which is a historical sources to a contemporary map project, or taking an explicitly spatial source from the past, that is the historic map, and using other materials to augment its meaning, to animate it in different ways. And we feel that for the most part, most of our work is in the second phase. Some of that augmentation can be done with GIS. So we call this the historical map to the historical map plus, plus, plus. The challenge for us is how do you do that augmentation without leaving the historical map behind? Or how do you keep the historical map there? And we've got, I'm aware of time, so I'm just going to go on. A really good kind of think piece is Talbot's project around the Putinga map of the Roman world project. And on this side of my slide, you can see the original map. It was called the Putinga map, which sort of surfaced in the 1500s, but is thought to have been scribed in 300 AD. It is nothing to do with georeference space as we understand it. And what they do is they turn it into this, which is a GIS map, which is extrapolated lines and nodes, routes and nodes, and put it into a GIS format. And that's very useful. And things are learned about the Roman world from doing this. There's a concentration of nodes and routes, or more nodes here than there are here. So, here we are closer to Italy and here we are further away. So we start to understand something about reach and settlement and intensity of power, perhaps from a map like this. So this is one exercise you can do, and we're in the process of going through a set of play exercises to experiment with what we want to do and what we want to achieve with our map. But just to say that, for all of the gains of this, there's a whole set of things that are lost here, and somehow mediating between those two outcomes is an important value that we're trying to define and outline in the project. We are at the point where I hand over to Siang, so I'm going to stop my share, and over to you, Siang.
It would help if I unmuted myself first. And I'm going to start my share and take over from Jane. Hello, everybody. I'll just go straight to, okay, and here we go. All right, so I'll just sort of give us a kind of update about where we are and what kind of things we're experimenting with in this phase of our project research. And so I think before I joined sometime in October last year, the Yale and US team met with our partner libraries and colleagues from Yale DH Lab at a workshop in Oxford and have defined the scope of the project, as well as to discuss technical possibilities and challenges. And as Jane mentioned, we're in the process of recruiting IT staff to develop the platform, which includes IIIF development, as well as the UX and UI design. We've had more success with the recruitment of student assistants, and they're very helpful for us during this summer. And so at the moment, we have a team of 6 researchers and assistants working on the historical research as well as IT development. So what has somewhat been sort of delayed and scuppered a little bit was, I think around about this time is where I'm preparing to fly to Leiden tomorrow for a deep dive into archives and to, especially to look at materials that might require digitization or re-digitization for the project. But since, even though we can't do that, what's really good is that the virtual working has given us the opportunities to sort of look deeper and longer at the collection items that have already been digitized, and to think more carefully about how we can curate the maps on the platform and what kinds of value we can add. It's giving us a time to consider what kinds of spatial history work the maps can allow us to do, and then what other kinds of augmentation we can apply to the maps. And so, what are we doing to develop our capabilities to share assets through the III framework? We have got a checklist of the requirements of using the III framework and working on implementing a IIIF image server for the storage of images, and working on the IIIF presentation API, extending that for custom metadata fields and the content search API. And so we've just begun work now on prototyping the image server and the presentation platform. And this includes researching the functionalities and features of IIIF that we want to adopt, and also then to establish consistency of these functionalities across the different partner institutions, finding a consistent way of sharing and accessing assets. And at the same time, we're in this very interesting phase of sort of evaluating what kind of user functionalities we want to adopt. And we have set some members of our student research team the task of surveying different digital mapping projects that already exist. And this is really for us to evaluate user functionalities, or perhaps we should say for us to evaluate useful functionalities. I think several of these online map projects exist with different topical scopes and offering different levels of interest in spatial history, or even versus history of cartography. So on the one hand, on the sort of more popular and accessible end, we have websites like All Maps of the World, where users select from a list of maps and see where they lay on what we now know as a map of the area we recognize. And then there's Dave Rumsey's very extensive collection of maps, which doesn't just offer extensive map references, but it also it offers functions as diverse as georeferencing, and they've also developed an app outside of the website for augmented reality interaction with the maps. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, are these necessarily functions that we might want to adopt? And I'm not saying no just yet, but these are survey questions that we're asking ourselves at the moment. We need to consider the varied level of users that we're including, and therefore the varied levels of usability. And we need to find a balance in the functionalities. Of course, we want something intellectually flexible, which online archives and library catalogs are. They're there. The information is there already, and it's fairly flexible how a researcher wants to go in and play with that. But would that be a bit too sort of with the search functions or the functionalities become too clunky in that format without any kind of adaptation? On the other hand, if we offered things that interact very quickly and interestingly with the public, would that be too interpretively didactic, And then, one of the key questions now that we are sort of grappling with is, do we want our map portal to allow researchers to illustrate linear mapped out narratives, or do we want to sort of maybe open it up a little bit and provide them with elements and tools that will suggest ways that they can take forward their exploration, sort of a build your own adventure kind of format. So one of the ways to think about the issues and what kind of functionalities we adopt, right, is to remind ourselves that one of the stated objectives of this project is to enhance our digital humanities capacity. And what I personally find helpful is to remind ourselves that digital humanities as a field allows for different disciplines and different types of primary sources to be presented together to enhance our understanding of particular subjects. Sort of referring back to Cathy's earlier presentation about the different types of analysis that people do, we want to think about what digital humanities tools we might be able to include on this portal to enhance research use of the portal. So on that note, one of the interesting examples that we had earlier found and are kind of benchmarking against is the University of Victoria's map of early modern London. And so already on the kind of landing page, we see that this platform brings together the cartographic primary source, the map, as well as allows for textual sources come under the same portal, allowing for very quick and easy cross-disciplinary access into the research. And at the same time, sort of from a GIS questions point of view, in the decision to present the map itself as if and just embed interactivity in it, rather than to geo-reference that onto a base map, this gets around the methodological questions of whether or not, and if yes, how, we should be geo-referencing or geo-rectifying historical maps to contemporary boundaries. And in fact, this kind of presentation might also be even useful, even when we come into the more detailed settlement maps of the 19th century or the 20th century ones. Another important benchmark project for us is Harvard University's Imperia, and this is a project mapping the Russian Empire. And the project was based on an atlas of the Russian Empire with different sheet maps. And what they had done was to geo-reference the maps to real-world coordinates, and then they found the coordinates then off the back of a deck of playing cards that had a different Russian region at the back of it with the coordinates. So this brings together different sets of primary source materials. And now what the Harvard team did not do was they didn't just warp the old atlas according to our contemporary base map, because that would cause distortion to the image. There was some level of post-production and image editing to sort of stretch the map to the boundaries to make the overlay neat and coherent. And then for these different nodal points that they've got here, it brings together data from other types of sources to give a rich visualization to the networks that are within the Russian Empire. So these two projects give us sort of food for thought on how to invite a cross-disciplinary reading of the maps. And so in considering the range of functionalities that we might offer then, in addition to the basic and advanced search function or geo-referencing tools, we would like to think about offering sort of a build and save your map collection so that you can sort of always go back to what you're looking at. And in addition to that, maybe we want to sort of also offer textual analysis tools for in case you had a text that you're reading alongside with the maps, and for you to upload and to be able to sort of do your own n-grams word clouds to do some kind of textual or even network analysis with. So these are things that, sort of at the moment, as we're playing with it, we're thinking of whether or not, what works best for each possible project. I'll have a demo to sort of show you an example of what we're trying to achieve with one of the experiments that we're doing. And so we've got actually student researchers to help us to develop some of these demonstration samples and experiments. I'll just go straight into the next slide to talk about them. So this first project, the Portuguese and Dutch in Southeast Asia, this is based on Peter Borsbrook's research on the travels of Jacques de Coudre and Admiral Cornelius Matelief. Why we thought it was actually interesting to bring this together is that the travel journals are published separately as separate volumes. So if you didn't think of a comparative, you would be reading one each as a standalone. But our starting point wasn't just his textual kind of work that he had done, but also that he had selected for the back cover of his book two maps that kind of represented the two travelers' journeys. And that gave us, sort of a starting point to think about, what is different between these two maps. What do they represent? What do they show? And if we, and that's what we're doing now, take each of the points that each traveler had gone to and we mapped it out and overlaid it, are we going to see convergence or are we going to see divergence? And so I'll show you a little bit more about a demonstration of what we're trying to achieve with this project in a while. And then a hat tip to Yale DH Labs Vogue project. It's called Robots Reading Vogue, where they did a textual analysis of, I think, about nearly 100 years worth of Vogue magazine from their archives. But one of the other interesting things that they did was they used machine image visualization to analyze Vogue magazine covers by the 10 years blocks. And I think when one of the things that sort of alerted to us as we survey these maps was that over time, the outlines and the borders of the maps that we're looking at really changes. And of course, in the earlier period that we're looking at around the 1600s, we get overview maps. But then as we move closer and closer into the 19th century, we're getting more and more detailed and zoomed in forms, right? And so we actually really do want to sort of try to make use of technology to try to see what the visual variants will be. We've got a student who is working also then on the Dutch colonial mapping of Indonesia. Earlier maps from the earlier period of our survey tend to be overview maps, but by the time we come into the late 18th century, into the 19th century, the Dutch Colonial Topographical Bureau actually has very, very good examples of very detailed mapping of nodal settlements and showing us not just the details of what is there, but also, you know, showing us what has been, what continues to be built and how things continue to change. And so that's one of the areas where we're going to look into and going to think about how we're going to present that information and that data. We have also got a project where we're trying to sort of pin out locations of commodities. And so starting with the spice trade and sort of taking Herman Moll's new map of the Indies as a starting point. Herman Moll's map is you know, one of the rare examples where it actually tells you X marks the spot. You can find gold in Borneo, land mines, tin mines in Laos, and gold mines in the Malayan Peninsula, spices here and there. So it actually marks it out for you. But we're doing research here and trying to sort of make use of all the historic maps that we've got and really trying to pin down where the locations of these particular commodities are, and as a kind of visualization. So that's the work that we've set our students the task of working on. And I just want to give, a, hang on. Okay, so just to give an example of, it hung a little bit. Okay, so we've got a kind of demo for the kind of work that, the kind of functionalities that we want to be adopting for the Peter Boschberg project, for example. So we'll start with a base map, and then we've got a menu panel at the top that people can sort of toggle in. And you can click on historical maps and it will bring out an overlay. And you can select, you know, which of the maps you want to turn on and off. And so right now what we've got here is Hondius's India Orientalis that we're looking at. And we would offer a georeferencing option if you wanted to really map your outlines to the borders of, to match with the contemporary base map. And we can also allow for transparency toggle so that you can still see what's underneath and reference to where these places are today. At the same time, we can also do sort of a swiping, you know, you can, sorry, I was too quick with that. So we can also swipe in and out to turn on and off that overlay. Those are some of the things that we can play with. Or we can toggle onto the merchant routes function where we can select, you know, whose journey we would like to focus on. And we can pin in, you know, particular port locations. And we can do comparatives. And when we hover over the different port points, right, we can input and embed tooltips to give more information either about objects or commodities or a quotation from the travel journal. And we can actually select to highlight, you know, the different routes to compare against. So this is not based specifically on the data that we have right now. We're still collecting data, but we would like, you know, we would hope that the data will be able to show us, you know, whether or not the lines converge or diverge. And also then at the bottom, we would have a kind of a timeline feature where, you know, as we move along and progress along the years, you know, the trade lines might shift and might change and look different as well, or different city ports might pop up and others fade away. And I think I'd like to mention that, you know, thanks to Michelle Quak, who, you know, who's helped us to sort of develop this kind of overview mock-up for this presentation. And so really, so that's kind of like where we are with the project and the kinds of experimentations that we're doing. And hopefully, you know, with the summer, we've got our students to give us a lot of help, and hopefully sort of by the third quarter, we'll have more substantive results to be able to speak of. Yeah. And I think with that, I thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jane and Siang, for this very important insight into the current state of your project that actually connects to all of the presentations in this panel. So we have time until about 37, so I hope we can now have maybe 2 questions depending on how long this takes. So Gemma, who's actually on the list now?
I haven't had any questions come in yet, but just in case for newcomers, yeah, you can just drop questions into the chat box. So does anyone have any questions now?
Emma, how about me really quick?
Oh yeah, sure.
Sorry. So wonderful stuff again. Thank you so much, Siang and Jane. My question, again, it's kind of a little specific, but I'm real curious about Peter's commodity project. So there's the mole map that provides, I guess, an accounting of where these commodities are found. Has Peter already collected additional information about these two, or is he working solely from that map and sort of, going beyond it? I'm curious where you're at with kind of geo-referencing, locating spatially where these commodities are coming from.
So I think with the mole map, so Peter's not specifically worked with the mole map, but Peter has done a lot of work in the past looking at rare commodities, and he's published those in various languages. So not just the English language press, but also in German as well, I think. And he's worked on musk, he's worked on camphor, rare commodities trade. And we have his research on standby to refer to if we want to. But with the spice and pepper trade kind of project, right? I think at the moment, what we're at the very beginning stage of sort of just pinning based on textual materials and textual reports that we have, where these things are found and located. My own suspicion is that we're going to see a kind of chronological development, that at the beginning, certain things were mentioned at a certain period of time. And then because, the exploration of the Spice Islands and the Moluccas came somewhat later because it was further away. And so I think by the time it gets there, and one of the questions I have is, you found a pot of gold. Why would you want to mark X is here and publish it to the rest of the world, right? And I think at that point in time, once those maps begin reproduced and shared amongst the wide public, right, I think that's where people go like, X marks the spot, let's go there. And we might be seeing a lot more activity maybe around the 18th century, so the beginning of the 18th century. So those are my sort of theory and suppositions about what we're going to see when we play and interact with the maps with the data. And I think this summer is where we're trying to see whether or not that data bears up that that theory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Okay, thanks. Gemma, did we have?
I think that's all the questions for now.
Okay, we have.
Stefan, I'll just say, I'd be really, one of our biggest challenges, I think, is finding the right information technology hires, people who've got the right type of skill set. So that at the moment, that's the project challenge that we're facing. And at some point, this is just to say, because I don't quite know how to do it in the virtual world that we're in, but I would like to talk to Peter and Cathy if you have a moment at some point across the day. It would be good to chat with you about, so maybe there's a little breakout group, Gemma or Sharon that kind of talks about what are the job descriptions that you put in the newspaper to get those people in that you really want? We're finding that quite challenging in the Singapore context at the moment. So it might be a challenge that other people have found as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
We'd be happy to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks, Cathy.
This was actually going into the direction I was or would have asked about the actual IT involvement in all these projects. I mean, this is one thing, in addition to also the potential involvement of natural scientists who might actually be interested in a variety of the maps that you are digitizing. I mean, our biodiversity project is actually only one dimension of all that, but this is really, I think, an opportunity to try, not only here at NUS, but generally to bring really together humanities and social sciences scholars with natural scientists and also IT experts. And then this recruitment question really comes up because very often it's tricky to find an RA, for example, an IT student who would be able to do that. But you already covered this, so thanks for that.
So, Stefan, can I just add quickly, I know the time is up, but I'll just add quickly that our concept of ourselves in developing the platform, our primary goal is to develop the platform. In a way, it's we only have a sample historical inquiry editing device. So we have a concept of ourselves and the project as really being interested in serving the research needs of those who are around us. The way this map collection might generate interest and resource for various types of questions is something we really are interested in and is a core value of the way we're doing our development.
Could I just add one very fast point on that, I think, Jane, and that is on the commodity aspect in particular. I mean, a lot of folks don't know what eaglewood looks like or what agar looks like or what camphor looks like. I mean, there's a whole rich, these things have been so abstracted through commodity exchanges and through uses, we don't know what they look like in their natural state. And I'm just thinking from a pedagogical point of view, in teaching my environmental history classes at Yale and US, having access to this kind of map would be brilliant, where you could sort of actually show students, this is what camphor looks like, this is the setting in which it's grown, this is, both geographically where it is, and those very important human routes that intersected with those particular biodiverse zones. So I'm just, from a teaching point of view, I think it's really, really kind of valuable.
Excellent.
And I think, just coming to that as well, is from an environmental history point of view as well, ecologically, so for example, pepper needs shade to grow, and that's why it's always found in forested areas, and, for the more, when we come nearer to our own time frame, right, are we able to see the kinds of landscape changes, with deforestation, what does that do to pepper plantations? Or are they now able to be cultivated somewhere else, in a more domesticated farming kind of environment rather than in the wild as well? I think those are things that maps might be able to show something and give an indication of.
Excellent. Thank you both. Thank you both very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I want to thank you again for the overview of the project. And now we come to the last paper, which is actually given by Anthony, Michelle, Quak, and myself. And I will now share the screen. Since I'm also the chair, quickly introduce Michelle, who is GIS research technologist at the Yale-Nus library and was extremely helpful with advising us on our pilot project and also contributing to it, and also in training our research assistants. And Michelle, as Jane already mentioned, is also working with her and the Digital Historical Maps project. So I also want to thank Jane and Ronald Milne for introducing us to Michelle. And I will now give you a very brief overview of the objectives of our project. Then Michelle will talk a bit about the implementation, and then Anthony about the future plans. So what is our pilot project about? As the title, which is Asian Natures, Alien Species, Past, Present, and Future, hints at, our interest is in biodiversity changes in Asia, in particular the arrival of alien species and their naturalization in Singapore, as well as the consequences. A recent report of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the IPBES, suggests that the annual economic loss attributed to naturalized species, especially if they turn invasive, is estimated at $33.5 billion in Southeast Asia. Therefore, our digitization and visualization project is supposed to give new insights into socioeconomic stability, health surveillance, and food security by analyzing the arrival of now naturalized species over the course of the last roughly 200 years, and also the related vectors. In the pilot project, we focus on Singapore, which is of particular interest since it can be seen as an entrepot, the port city as a vector for the arrival of new species, so to speak, which might also serve as a model for investigating other port cities and their hinterlands. And Anthony will say a bit more about that in our future plans overview regarding the upscaling of the project. So what we aim for is a fresh perspective on how to visualize different forms of data that help us to gain new insights into the history of biodiversity change, vectors, and consequences. To recognize and analyze these changes, vectors, and consequences, we are collecting historical and current data on where naturalized species were spotted and visualize this georeferenced data on historical and current maps that show land use change and other potential vectors, ranging from deforestation and the spread of plantations and gardens to Singapore's urban expansion, infrastructure construction, land reclamation, shipping routes, and so on. Another goal of the pilot project is to contribute to the digital humanities landscape here in Singapore via strongly interdisciplinary research. Our data, our methods, and our analysis are all interdisciplinary and based on collaborations between historians, archivists, librarians, social scientists, and natural scientists, in particular biologists from DBS, which is not the bank, but the Department of Biological Sciences here at NUS. This interdisciplinary research interest goes back to an interdisciplinary workshop that Anthony and I organized about 1 year ago when we were both at Harvard, which, as the subtitle said, placed the global Pacific in the age of climate change. Anthony was moving to Singapore and I was coming back to Singapore, and both of us were interested in the interactions between land and sea. So we wanted to continue this interdisciplinary research focus on environmental transformations and biodiversity change. And in February, what now seems like years ago, honestly, as Tim mentioned, we hosted a conference on the rise and consequences of invasive ecologies in Asia and the West Pacific at ARI, which laid the academic and networking groundwork for our pilot project. Since this event brought together the aforementioned scholars from the humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences for interdisciplinary discussions and also for future collaborations. We are now also working on a special issue of Environment and History on naturalized species, which will partially draw on data from our pilot project. In that sense, we also want to thank ARI for the support that we received for the Invasive Ecologies Conference, and one of our aims in the future is to intensify ARI's focus on environmental and biodiversity topics. And earlier this year, we already received an HSS collaborative seed grant, which is the financial foundation of this pilot project and also of this workshop here. This allowed us to begin our digitization visualization work, which draws on the source material collections held by our collaborators, and that we are now digitizing, OCRing, and mining for relevant data to build our database to feed our visualization platform, which is currently Tableau, and Michelle will talk about that in a couple of minutes. So these collaborations currently include the NUS Libraries, the NUS Natural History Museum, and Singapore's National Park Board, while we are also receiving technical support from them as well as from the Yale-Nus Libraries and the NUS Geography Department's GIS Master Program. And I want to end here with a quick thank you to our collaborators and also to our research assistants, as well as to Michelle, who will now continue the presentation. So we now stop the screen sharing and move on to Michelle. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'll just bring you through today how we managed to get from some sort of like a data spreadsheet kind of data information into something that is presentable to the public, or something that's available online where everyone can see your dashboard. So right now what you see here is a spreadsheet of the data that our students have collected. These are all related to species that are found within journals, early journals, detailing the sighting of a new species or existing species within Singapore. So the data includes a whole range of information from the species name to the kingdom to group name and order and family name of such species. I think they have also collected information of date of first sighting and the location of when it was first sighted. Other information like the journals that was mentioned and journal articles, additional information about the sighting and perhaps the environment that it was in. So this would be attained from the journals itself. We have also the location of the sighting, latitude and longitude, so XY coordinates, year of extinction if applicable, and other information like bird calls, recordings, etc. So from this spreadsheet, the information that we are interested in would be first the XY coordinates of the locations of where these species were sighted, because using this information, we can then plot it on a map in Tableau. So now I will go to my Tableau dashboard. Let me just share it here. So this Tableau dashboard is available publicly. So Tableau Public is a software where you can visualize your data very easily. So from the spreadsheet data, I can easily plot points or graphs like you see here. This is a graph showing the number of records of species that were first sighted in each year. And if you look here, there is a whole range of other types of visualizations that you can actually make use of in Tableau. So it actually presents your data in a very visual manner. So it's quick and easy to visually analyze your data. So another way of showing your data could be the locations of the first sighting of each species. So right now we have here a mapped out species sighting locations, and it's color coded by the group names. So very quickly you can highlight groups of data just by clicking here. And we can also show tooltips. So if you hover over a location, you can check out the name, the group name, the species name, and other information that you want to append to this tooltip. So later on, I'll show you a very cool way of visualizing how data can be shown through time. And that would be through this little panel over here, which I'll cover later. So there's another way of showing your data locations, and this would be a heat map. So this heat map shows you hotspot areas where multiple species have been sighted. So the red areas show a higher number of species. So this is just a quick way of visualizing your data. You can also segment out this area of hotspots, and after that you can go into further detail about what these species are. So we can simply select it here. And you can also group this and look into it deeper. So okay. In the next panel of information, you'll see a historical map as a background here. So this can be input into this Tableau through a web map service. And this map is actually the land use map of Singapore in 1963. And I have just included it from the Lib Maps website. So this is the historical digital maps of Singapore, which was done by NUS Libraries and Department of Geography. So I can simply change the base map over here. So that's the image that you see at the background. And if I hover over this land use shape over here, so this shapefile is taken from the 2014 land use map from URA. So we can compare between 1963 and 2014, what has changed over the years. And right now I've highlighted the residential land use. I can also filter the roads. It takes a while to load, so because it's a huge data set. So it's highlighted in brown here. And cemetery areas So in a way, you can compare between the two years and you see what has changed in terms of land use. Okay. So once you have created some sort of visual analytics of your data, you can combine all 4 panels that I've shown you earlier into a dashboard. And this kinds of shows you your information and different ways that you can visualize them. So earlier I mentioned a timeline of showing your data. So this would be this little gadget here where you can click play and it brings you through the first sighting of each species through the years. And it accumulates into this graph showing the locations of each species that was sighted. So right here, I can also have a quick toggle of the types of land use that I want to select. So for open space, I can click on the open space and it appears on the map itself. So this is a very interactive kind of dashboard where you can create and show your users, and they themselves can also select specific users and specific data. So here are the filters that you can select, filtering your data.
这还挺好的呀，这不就是老丁想做的东西吗？
You're okay, go ahead.
Oh, okay. And in this dashboard as well, you can add text here. And this would be added in from this area here. You can add text, you can add images. You can also add web pages as part of your dashboard. So once you've created your dashboard, you can publish it online. So I'll show you how it looks like online. So right here, this has been published and users can go into the dashboard to play around with the filters and they can visualize the data that they want to see. It's kind of hanging a little. So in future runs of the dashboard or perhaps a different platform, I think some of the improvements that can be made would include maybe including images in the tooltips. So if you had an image of the species itself, it gives the user a clearer idea of how it looks like. Perhaps an image of the surroundings as well. So if the species was found in a forested area, how would it look like on the ground if you were there? Perhaps a more flexible way of showing your data as well. So if your filters could be integrated a lot better, it work with the user experience of the data dashboard. We could add other mediums of data, for example, sound clips or video clips of the species, and also climate data. So layering upon what we have, it gives us a better overview of the environment that was like in the past and versus today. And I guess the main improvement to be made could be to integrate all the data that you see here into one centralized overview. So it gives you a more seamless overlay of information. So instead of looking at different pockets of graphs or charts, you can combine them all into one platform. And it allows you to visualize multiple data layers and as well as historical maps. So we can compare between maps that are beyond 1963 and also beyond 2014. I guess what would be cool would be also annotations that your user can make on the platform itself. So areas that they are interested in, they can highlight, they can zoom in, and they can probably export out the data if applicable. Yeah. So I'll hand over the time back to Stefan, to Anthony, I guess.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Okay, I now start the screen sharing again, and I think we also should quickly mention that what you saw on this map were only a couple of species, just to illustrate this. I mean, our database at the moment has, I think, already about 1,000 entries for Singapore alone. So, Anthony, is this fine?
So what I'm going to talk about then is moving forward and scaling up. And maybe we can go to the next. Well, you can hang here for a second. So quickly, kind of what we plan to do moving forward. First off, we should probably say this pilot project has been working with we have about 15 student researchers that are involved in this, coming from Yale-Nus and NUS. A good chunk of them were students from my class that I taught this semester, which made it for a sort of nice capture audience. And many of them are zoomed in right now. So I want to thank them for all the hard work that they've been doing during this really kind of unthinkable moment with the pandemic. But moving forward, what we're thinking about is really how important biodiversity is, and linking biodiversity to the humanities, and really kind of thinking about something maybe around the idea of the environmental humanities or biodiverse humanities. And we see this really scaling up beyond Singapore, beyond the work that we're doing with Singapore. So if we could just go to the next slide. You know, we're in a region here where, and this is why biodiversity is so important, why we want to stay with this idea and scale it up. We're in a region where it's the world's richest center of marine biodiversity. It's one of the world's richest centers for terrestrial biodiversity. And changes in biodiversity, as we can now see with COVID-19, changes in biodiversity have direct implications for public health. They have direct implications for food security and socioeconomic stability, among a number of other things. So we see this as really a kind of critical area for digital scholarship, but also environmental, historical, and humanities work. So bringing all of that together in a really kind of rich interdisciplinary way. So scaling up and growing, we have plans for a much larger grant project. And so in moving in that direction, we want to see this pilot kind of grow in 5 specific ways. One is through inclusion. So we want to really speak to this kind of coral triangle. That's the marine biodiversity zone. That's the world's richest in the world. That's where we are. So we want to include really the range of that coral triangle. So that would mean adding into our study or our future project, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. So there's a greater spatial inclusion of the region. Second, we want to grow in terms of new collaborations. One being with the Natural History Museum in London, which we have connections with, I think already, or which we do have connections with through the Natural History Museum here in Singapore. But we want to really sort of, formally and aggressively pursue that moving forward. Secondly, working with the National Archives of Singapore, we've got members of the National Archives zooming in today. This, we think, is a really rich area for thinking about biodiversity in ways that are familiar to people. So it could be in terms of maps, it could be in terms of data, it could be in terms of collections, and really putting together these different bits of information. And then thirdly, a new collaboration we'd like to pursue is with the Asian Civilizations Museum, which has done work on natural history, which would be the natural way to kind of bring an organization like that into conversation with ideas about past, present, and future interests in biodiversity. Third, we want to grow in terms of synergy, and this really means complementing existing grant-funded projects, finding those synergistic opportunities where current work and ongoing work could be mutually beneficial, both in terms of what we bring and what others have. So from Jane's presentation and her team with Ronald and Michelle and others, we see a real rich opportunity there. Later today, Fiona Williamson will be talking about her climate project, which would be another opportunity. And then Ken Dean and his temple project, we think, is again a rich point of synergy where the kinds of questions that we're trying to address or at least raise with biodiversity intersects in many ways with these kinds of projects. And that's kind of where I was thinking about this idea of a kind of biodiverse humanities. Fourthly, we want to really support exchange and knowledge production, and we see that in a couple different ways. One, we've already got about 15 students that we've trained with Michelle's significant help in mining, in looking for things that are relevant to biodiversity and alien species in particular. So we want to continue building student capacity in the digital humanities, both for their assistance with our project, but also as a kind of contribution to the digital humanities community in Singapore and beyond. And then thirdly, I mean, for students to have these professional and technical skills, it would be great in terms of, as they enter a very sort of challenging market right now after school. So we see a role in playing in that and helping them develop their skills as well as their interests. Exchange too in terms of seminars, so giving public talks, talking about the different sources that we use, the methods, and again, hammering home the importance both historically but also in the present of biodiversity and how it cuts across all disciplines and fields. Running workshops much like this one, and then finally international conference participation, so joining existing conferences when those resume, hopefully soon. And then finally, thinking about new data sources. So this is stuff, in terms of scaling ahead or scaling up and moving forward. These are things that we're touching on now, but we'd really like to bring it in a more fuller way. So sounds, specifically about birds, and there's some wonderful digital collections, particularly the Ornithology Lab at Cornell University has an enormous database of bird sounds that have been collected through a kind of citizen science project that they've been running for a number of years. So we want to integrate sounds into the species files that we have and then populate our map with those sounds, much like what Michelle was indicating in terms of the tooltips. Secondly, images. We've got a lot of images, but again, integrating those images into our map, our visualization platform. And then we've got a student, Cathy Poe, who's an arts and humanities major who just graduated or who's in the process of graduating. I suppose she just graduated, actually. School's now technically over. But she's been real interested in visual representation. So looking at these old natural history journals and flagging botanical and other species illustrations. So incorporating the kind of work that Cathy's, the work that she's drawn our attention to, and incorporating those scientific illustrations into the tooltips. Other data points that we want to include through this kind of historical mining process. Plantations. Singapore had a number of plantations in the 1820s and 30s. Many of those disappeared due to land use changes after the 1860s and the 1870s, but those plantations speak to changes in biodiversity. They speak to the introduction of cultivated plants. So we want to bring that into that informational layer into these maps as well. Another important aspect would be specific to Singapore, but also to Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, and that is community gardens. Old maps from the 1830s of Singapore indicates where you had Chinese gardens, where you had local gardens. These were collective gardens that were used by communities. Again, these would be sites for the introduction of plant species that might not be vernacular to or local to Singapore, but now we might think of these species as very much part of the landscape. So bringing in dimensions of gardens as another valuable data point. And then lastly, I want to just say climate and health are the two other historical data sets that we want to bring in. Climate in terms of rainfall, temperature, and wind. All of this is available in the historical sources that we have already. And then in terms of health, things like historical cases of dengue and malaria which would speak to mosquito populations, as well as the presence of, and then the eventual loss of mangroves. So again, there's a kind of rich environmental biodiversity story embedded in climate and in health. But these are the areas that we want to grow and kind of build on and scale up as we look to turning our pilot into a much larger collaboration with our partners and the work that we aim to do. And I'll pass it back to you, Stefan.
Okay, thanks a lot. And now we have a couple of minutes left. We will stick to the time plan. So Gemma, do we?
Yeah, we do have one question from Kenneth Dean. So if he wants to give those questions.
Okay, Ken, then go ahead, please.
Okay, I was very interested by the presentation. Thank you all for showing what you've been doing. I have a question whether your data is open source and downloadable, and also what limitations you may have encountered with Tableau Public so far. I saw a lot of the many positive features it can bring to the table, but I'm wondering if you've had some frustrations as well.
I think Anthony and Michelle can afterwards follow up, but I would like to say I think currently our database is not yet public. It will eventually, I think, be public, but we have to do some more, looking through all that, cleaning up data, work with our DBS and NParks collaborators, the biologists who need to go through the list and really make sure that everything is in order there. But ideally, at least for the Singapore aspect, that's a matter of weeks, maybe months. And eventually, I mean, the purpose is to make this all public. Thanks.
Maybe I could just add one point to that too. The other, dealing specifically with Singapore, and this would be, I'm sure, a case as we expand into Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, and that is, where species are located historically on maps would have been totally fine if we were back in the 19th century. But nowadays, we've got things like the Ministry of Defense, and there are spaces on the map that are a little sensitive. So in addition to running, and being accurate about the species and its taxonomic identity, we also have to run it across, run it by these various government entities so that we don't broach or traverse on anything too sensitive. Yeah, so this is where the map and where space really does become, it sort of trumps the importance of the species in some ways.
Okay, as for Tableau, I guess one of the limitations would be the tooltips. In a way, it's not as flexible as we want. For example, adding in an image or images. The workaround would be to add in a link to the image. So if you're storing your image elsewhere. So the same thing goes for audio clips and videos. The other limitation would be, I guess, overlaying of multiple maps. So not just 2 maps, but 4 or 5 historical maps. That might be an issue. Of course, it's, again, what do you want to present to your audience, and depends on your research question as well. Perhaps 2 maps is just enough, just a comparison between 2 time frames. But if you want to do it across multiple time frames, there may be workarounds, but no clear straightforward solution. But I guess Tableau is really a very quick and easy way of presenting your data, and it's very useful in terms of filtering and for a lay person to just pick it up and use. I guess if you want to have more complicated filtering, overlaying of data, a nicer interface, for example, you might need a bit of programming skills, yeah. But other than that, I think it's a fabulous way of showing your data.
May I have one final follow-up? I'm curious, when you're showing the first appearance of an invasive species, do you also intend to show distributions of those species over time? And how would that work with your mapping?
I guess if you want to see the distribution of species over time, it's possible through heat maps. And I showed the time slider. You can actually use that to visualize across different time periods.
And for the larger project, we do plan, I'll say just really briefly and then Stefan can add, but we do plan for the larger project to do secondary spread. So not just arrival, but also the expansion of those species and how they get naturalized and the routes and vectors in which they spread, which is an important part of it. Stefan, maybe you want to add a thing to that.
Yeah, very, very quickly, this secondary spread is one of our concerns because this really then shows the implications, for example, for public health and also the biodiversity changes. This is, however, something that needs much more data. So that's indeed something for the coming months and years, I think. So, but we would like to emphasize that this is also an important aspect of the project.
And on that aspect, I think this is kind of a very telling dimension of our collaborative effort here. And that is secondary spread is something that's really important to the biologists that we work with. This was something that actually came from them. And what we thought of was, well, we can provide some historical understanding of that spread and visualizing that spread. So this was a challenge and a concern that biologists currently work with. And we thought, let's pair that challenge with historical sources and digital and visual sources so that we can all better understand both that process and potentially where it's leading.
Okay, then thank you. I'm aware that there are more questions, but we have to really stick to the time plan because, I mean, this is not like a normal coffee break. There will be people leaving and coming in, so we need to get back at 11:30. Yeah, I think this is the time when we reconvene, and also Anthony and I, we need to quickly vanish for a bit of time. So yeah, see you all again in a couple of minutes.
So thank you all, and we'll come back together at 11:30. Is that right, Stefan?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, fantastic.
In about 14 minutes. Yeah, thank you.